I got a kid, so I'm doing okay with the car, and I'm
Hold up, and you always come out the worst, no matter if you're going up against a cycle or a truck. My name is Jishnu, and this is 5-year review of the Maruti Baleno, and I've done about 38,000 kilometers now in these past 5 years. I get about 13 to 14 kilometers per liter in the city with local driving with the AC on in the summers. Highway, I would say about 4 or 5 kilometers more, but I haven't really driven on the highways in about 2 years now. In the past, when I bought the car, I used to drive pretty much regularly to work about 25 kilometers every day. I used to drive to South Delhi, and I used to get about, I would say, about 14 to 15 kilometers in terms of average. And that was a mix of some bits of highway driving locally within about 2 to 3 kilometers of the house. The roads are narrow, the traffic is very slow. I get about 12 to 13 kilometers because of that. If you're driving like a mixed bag where you're driving longer distances, you get about 15 to 16. So in terms of servicing, you literally get what you pay for with the Maruti. So it's value for money in terms of how much they charge you. The average cost is about 8 to 10,000 rupees depending upon what work goes on. And they typically have a lot of offers in terms of PMS labor discount or some sort of a wheel alignment discount or free car cleaning, etc. Pickups and drops, which is absolutely free. Overall, I would say it's a very good experience. I would give them an overall rating of 4 out of 5.
What kind of goof-ups are we talking about?
I hate to have my dashboard polished because it starts to stink and get sticky. Sometimes they don't follow basic instructions or they forgot to clean out the boot. Stuff like that. The running of the vehicle after a service, I've never had a complaint. Car always feels like, it's brand new every time it comes from servicing. In terms of insurance premiums, I think it's fairly affordable at 5 years of usage. I think last premium that I paid with the no claim bonus was about somewhere between 14 and 15,000 rupees. Inclusions in terms of coverage for the key, engine cover, it takes any rainwater damage, etc. Consumables for that matter, whether it includes tires, etc. So a lot of them, they charge a lot higher premium for these inclusions. Some have it in their base price itself. What happens with every passing year is that the valuation of the car comes down. So there are ceilings in terms of how much will the car be valued at after a certain amount of time. So I typically go for the sweet spot wherein I have a higher coverage with a lower premium. So whichever company affords that, higher coverage with lower premium is what I go for. This is the main factor that I look at, which is valuation of the car and the premium that they charge for that valuation in that 4th or 5th year. The CVT gearbox has been a dream to use simply because it's no fuss, no muss, it just works. And in terms of servicing over the past 5 years, there has been no work that's been done on the gearbox. It has lasted the test of time. Highway driving can get a little iffy if you don't plan your overtakes properly because it still has a rubber banding issue where the power sort of like is delayed when you're accelerating. Top start situation where you have to constantly keep braking and navigate traffic. This is an absolute dream. About a year or so of ownership of the car, my infotainment system received a software update via Maruti. The update allowed me to use CarPlay and Android Auto. So earlier it was only Android Auto. Braking has become iffy over the years, but then that sort of like gets addressed every time the car is sent for servicing every year. So towards the end of, let's say, about 10 or 11 months of using the car after the servicing, the braking still starts to get a little iffy. In terms of squeaks and rattles, you're in the car, right? And we are driving at about 40 kilometers right now, and apart from the outdoor noise from passing cars and the pedestrians, there's no squeaks and noises. What does at time rattle, which can get annoying, is the rear tray, the parcel tray that you have. So every time you open the boot, and if you want to place some luggage, and if you move the tray, and when you reseat it, you have to get it perfectly, otherwise it will keep rattling when you're at about 60 or 70 on the road. In terms of comfort, I don't really find the seat to be uncomfortable. Even over the years of using the car for the last 4-5 years that I've driven the car, the seat has held up, including the fabric. I don't really have any seat covers on this. So the fabrics have also held up, and I typically have passengers in the back seat as well on occasions, and even the back seats have held up. So the fabrics have held up, the seats have held up, the cushioning has held up. It's a little softer now. That I would say is your typical wear and tear that you would expect from any vehicle, any seat or any couch that you even using at home. The bench in the back has always had issues in terms of comfort. It's not the most comfortable, which is why I typically prefer to drive and not sit at the back, which hasn't really changed as well, right? We knew this when we bought this, that it's not the most comfortable rear seats. Been the case even now where they don't remain to be comfortable, but they're good enough, like a day-long drive, it's good enough. The rating first year when I got this was about 9 on 10. If I just compare that, I would say it about an 8. I'm talking points simply for what I mentioned earlier. The rear seats, they are not the most comfortable, which I knew when I bought it, and obviously Dr. Point back then as well. And even now, it continues to be a challenge for those who have to sit for long hours in the back seat. The cooling comfort is excellent. The automatic AC does work. The heads-up display is showing an ambient temperature outside at about 34 degrees. I think inside we're at about set at 25. So it's pretty comfortable at the moment, and you don't see me sweating, and I do sweat a lot during summers, so that's a good sign. Before and after, I would give it a solid 9. Because it hasn't really dipped, like I mentioned earlier as well. It hasn't required any major servicing or gas top-ups, etc. So it has the test of time, and the effectiveness of the cooling hasn't really dipped at all. This was my first automatic, so the driving pleasure back then was a 9 on 10. And at the moment it's about an 8 on 10 because I've gotten used to it, and so I'm just comparing it with how it was back then. There have been minor niggles here and there in terms of the overall smoothness of the car per se, because the shockers have also gotten old and haven't really been replaced over the past 5 years. So if you adjust it for a typical wear and tear that you would expect from a car that's been driven for about 38,000 kilometers and for about 5 years, the driving pleasure has gone down by a point, and I would say it's about 8 on 10 at the moment. I'm a stickler when it comes to giving out ratings, so I feel that even though because of the normal wear and tear, but to be honest, it's aged by 5 years, but not necessarily in terms of kilometers. So I'm docking a point purely because of that. We have just hit about 38,000 kilometers, so it has dipped a little. The look and feel aspect of the car is excellent. I still continue to love this car, the way it looks. For me, it hasn't really aged per se. The design still holds up to this day, and that's why the car still sells like hotcakes. I mean, a 9 on 10 before and after as well. I mean, the design for me personally has stood the test of time, and it still is one of those cars that look really good on the road. In terms of safety, myself or anybody else who has sat in the car hasn't really felt that the car is unsafe, no matter what speeds we are doing or whoever is behind the wheel. And we've had some minor bumps and hits over the years, and the car has stood tall against all of that and hasn't really caused any issues to the occupants. In terms of features alone, it's 8 on 10, and in terms of the overall ownership experience and how it has stood up over the 5 years of driving, I would still say it's about an 8 on 10. But the thing that hasn't aged well is the body. Well, I knew that when I bought the car, this was one of the lighter sheet metal cars, and Maruti is known for it. Cars are universally known and claimed as flimsy, but this sort of like took it to a next level where the Baleno, the sheet metal is very light, and so even if you're like leaning against the car at times, it can make a dimple in the on the body.
Is that so?
Yeah, it is. Like lots of scrape brushes against smaller and larger vehicles, where I've always come off the worst. The interiors look pristine, however the exterior looks 10 years old because of this reason. So the build quality is a very generic thing which consists of interiors, exteriors, everything. I would rate the exteriors as a 6 on 10 before and after. It hasn't really changed because I knew this getting into it. And the interiors, I would say, is about an 8 on 10. It's still a lot of plastic everywhere, but the plastic hasn't aged. This was, and I think still continues to be, one of the best value for money cars that you can get in the Indian market. In terms of value for money, it's a 9 on 10. Easy 9 on 10 for me, and especially if overall value for money, obviously the mileage has dipped over the years, and because of the way that I've been driving the car also, now it's about an 8 on 10, because if you factor in the mileage and the cost of ownership, when you look at it overall, I would say it's a 7 on 10, which has come down to 6 on 10 just because the exteriors really drag down the overall rating of this car, to be honest. Earlier I would say overall was about a 7 on 10, now I would say it's about a 6 on 10. I can sum up this entire driving experience and ownership experience of this car by saying you get exactly what you pay for. When you buy a Maruti, you get a Maruti. You get the reliability of a Maruti. You get cheaper or relatively low cost of maintenance of a Maruti. You do get the light sheet metals and materials that the Maruti typically is known for. You get them in this car as well, even though they have bashed it as an Nexa, but I don't really feel that it's a Nexa premium product just because of the build quality. But yeah, at the end of the day, it's exactly what I paid for it, and it's held up well, and it still continues to be a pleasure to drive. Unlike previous Maruti experiences that people have had, this is cut a little different. I would say this is the European version of a Maruti experience, where it's a little more polished to the entire product. Comes at a slight premium, but still a lot more inexpensive than some of the other offerings that we have in the market. Positive 3 is definitely the ease of driving, and that I think I can attribute some of it to the automatic gearbox that I have, the CVT gearbox that we have. That's one of the positives. The second positive is the overall creature comforts. They haven't really aged. The electronics have held up, so that's great. The third, I would say, is the secure feeling that you have when you're driving the car on high speeds. You know, some cars tend to rattle, some cars tend to fishtail and wiggle. This doesn't. This just continues to keep going without any issues on highways as well. In terms of the biggest negatives, one I would say is, of course, the exteriors of the vehicle. The build quality is not the best, which again, you know, if you're buying a Maruti. But it still continues pain point with myself, because even with minor brushes, you know, the car doesn't really hold up, and you always come out the worst, no matter if you're going up against a cycle or a truck. So rest assured, you'll be the second best to come out of any encounter on the roads. The second challenge that I've had over the years is at times with the servicing, where, you know, they don't really necessarily follow the instructions that's been shared, and they sort of like do like a mass servicing that they do. Because personalized touch when it comes to servicing doesn't really come through at times, even though they claim to be the premium offering, the Nexa servicing offering. I don't know if it's worth the extra money that you pay for the Nexa premium servicing, but I haven't really felt that over the years. So if you like this video, or if you've been looking to figure out if a Maruti is a good car to own, this particular variant, the Balenos, are definitely a really good car. And if you like this video, like and subscribe, and watch out for more videos similar to this for other cars in this price segment.
Thank you so much. Thanks a lot.
Pleasure.